So you probably should have just finished up taking the pre-assessment for quadratic functions. You might be done earlier than everyone else, which is why I'm having you watch this video. This is not something that we're going to jump into right away, because I want to make sure that tomorrow that we can all start at the same point at least. But this will come up as an important topic later in the unit as we get into stuff with the quadratic formula. So if you've seen the number I, so we use I, the letter, to represent a number. If you've seen that before, good. If you haven't, that's fine too. You're going to learn about it right now. So I wanted to start us off by taking three square roots here. You can do them on your calculator, maybe you just know them on your head. So the square root of 9 is we're looking for two numbers that multiply to give me 9. This would be equal to positive or negative 3, right? If we have a square root of 1, this could be positive or negative 1. Positive 1 times positive 1, negative 1 times negative 1. That would give me 1. And now if you try this, the square root of negative 1. So I'm trying to think of two numbers that multiply to give me negative 1. Multiplied by each other, a number multiplied by itself, that gives me negative 1. If you try this on your calculator, it will tell you error because your calculator does not know how to process a square root when there's a negative inside. Okay? So this is where we have to use our imagination, which is what mathematicians decided to do when they came up with this number. So the definition of the number I is that it is equal to the square root of negative 1. This means alternatively that this is the same thing as saying that I squared, I times itself, is equal to negative 1. So I is equal to the square root of negative 1. I squared is equal to negative 1 itself. Okay? Personally, I think that this one is easier to remember, that I squared is equal to negative 1, because we are going to have to use I squared eventually to turn a number into, or an imaginary number into a real number. Okay, so now you've learned what the definition of the imaginary number I is. It's I equals square root of negative 1, or I squared equals negative 1. So now what we need to do, so if we're doing that, let's look first at a few problems. So if I say that I have 3i squared, what is this equal to? So we're going to have to figure out what these things are equal to. This is actually a real number, even though there's an imaginary number here. So 3i squared is the same thing as 3 times, we know that I squared is equal to negative 1. This is equal to negative 3 then. So 3i squared is equal to negative 3. Let me do that. This is an important thing to realize. When you see an I squared, all you're going to do is take the number in front of it and put a negative there. Okay? Now we're going to talk a little bit about the number systems. Okay, so you guys have learned your whole lives about the real number system. And maybe some of you have learned about the complex number system. But so you've learned about real numbers your whole life. Real numbers. Okay? Real numbers are things that are integers. Rational numbers are just fractions. So 0 is a real number, negative 2 is a real number, 3/4 is a real number, 0.6721 is a real number. These are all examples of real numbers. Okay? Now what we are introducing is what are called imaginary numbers. Imaginary numbers. Okay? These are numbers that have this letter I in them. Okay? So imaginary numbers include I, negative I, 2i, 4i. All these things are imaginary numbers. They are purely imaginary numbers. Any combination of these two creates the total number system, or the biggest number system that contains both of them is called the complex number systems. Okay? So complex numbers have the form of A. A is the real number, so A is any real number plus BI. Okay? So an example of a complex number, so let's start off first. So A, this is the real part, and BI is the imaginary part. Imaginary part. So an example of a complex number would be, I don't know, 2. 2 is a real number. Now we're going to do plus, and then bi. So b can be any real number as well, actually. So we have over here 2i and 4i. 2 plus 4i. So this is a complex number now, and it has a real part, the 2, and then 4i is the imaginary part. We will go over how to do addition, subtraction, multiplication with these in the next video. But this is just an introduction to imaginary numbers, and then where in the number system imaginary numbers fall. So imaginary numbers combined with real numbers make complex numbers, but you can have purely real numbers, which are like these, or purely imaginary numbers.